So good to see you again, and thank you very much for being here. I know you've had an extraordinarily busy travel schedule, so thanks for coming to Asia House. There's a general assumption that you won't be part of the next government. That's the tone of your speech too. First question has to be, is that a reasonable working assumption?
Some of you looks very surprised, so I also surprised with this question. No, but serious answer, Indonesia is a presidential system within our politics. So the new elected president has been decided. So I think this is going to be a very critical and important transition. The new elected president and the vice president, they actually continue communicating that they will bring continuity. So we are hoping that many of these fundamentals that we've already discussed earlier is going to be continued, but at the same time also improving. So continuity with the improvement, I think that's important. Regarding the cabinet, unfortunately, Michael, I cannot answer that question because that is only the president who knows who's going to be in the cabinet. So your aspirations should be conveyed to the right person, not the wrong person.
Thank you very much. What's the key message you would give to any incoming folks? Is it fiscal prudence? You said do not sacrifice fiscal prudence, something along those lines. Is that the #1 message for any incoming finance minister?
Well, I think all the political parties recognize in order for us, Indonesia, to continue this journey, you really need to continue maintaining the good foundation. And that's good, because this is not about one person, but shared by all important parties in Indonesia. Indonesia is not like in the UK politics in which you only have two parties. Fortunately, we have more than two parties. I said fortunately, because we have at least 8 big elected parties which is sitting in the parliament. And this provides us with quite a lot of, in this case, political discussion, but also at the same time, we have the ability to juggle on this kind. But on the fiscal prudence, I think they are all more or less share that this principle should not be sacrificed. And market is also a good providing signal. So the new government is already receiving the signal that the market want Indonesia to continue with this fiscal prudence. So I think now the transition team has been managing and seeing and listening to all this signal. And I'm sure within the 2025, as I said earlier, that we are in charge of preparing the budget for the first year of this government. That signal will continue to be conveyed.
You are preparing the budget for next year, and you spoke very clearly about the external issues. It's the most challenging external environment I think I've seen in a long, long time, if not ever. What's the biggest external risk? Is it the strength of the dollar and US interest rates? Is it the conflicts that are going on? Again, as you frame your budget.
Well, the exchange rates movement or dollar strengthening in this case is definitely have a more immediate impact, because you every day will see in terms of our revenue, which is some of them in dollar. That means strengthening dollar in rupiah denomination, we have more rupiah. But we also have the spending which is based on dollar also in this case, like our subsidy and so on. So we really need to look at this balance, because the impact is immediate. The second one is also on the interest rate. This higher for longer. I mean, Federal Reserve Chairman Powell increasing the interest rate only less than 18 months by more than 500 basis points, 5.25, 5.5%. Indonesia, our yield of our bonds, 10 years, is actually relatively steady, both the US and local currency. So our spread with the US is now has been tightened to the lowest in the history, only 230 basis points. And that's why this is a good achievement, because many of bondholders, and by the way, I'm here because I'm going to see many of these important bondholders, they're going to still continue to see Indonesia as a good investment place. But certainly the pressure at comparing the risk return is going to be there. So for us, again, this US strengthening interest rate higher for longer is going to have a more immediate impact. But if you ask about what is going to be like the big game changer, geopolitics and climate change.
Yep.
Oh, and then digital, the artificial intelligence. I actually just received that people can really replace me with AI, which is, I think, is good. So you don't need Mulyani. You can have AI. So that's going to be quite a game changer, I think.
And you and the central bank, you and Pakai work very closely together, and you make a feature of that. He's spoken to us about it, and so have you. You talked about it there. Again, is that a policy you would advise that continues into this next government?
Well, central bank is an independent since 97, 98, when Indonesia have the banking and economic crisis. A lot of governance and fundamental of the way we establish our institutions changed quite dramatically. One is the independence of the central bank. So central bank have their own cycle, and this current central bank governor has been re-elected for the second term. That means there will be a continuity on the monetary side.
I want to get on to e-commerce, and the digital transformation in Indonesia has been breathtaking. But the moratorium on tax by the world was extended by another 2 years at the last WTO meeting. You've opposed that. Again, looking out in a couple of years, do you see that changing, and what sort of impact will that have on revenue generation in Indonesia?
Well, on this moratorium, it's not actually related to the revenue, because it's not generating revenue in a way. But I think all countries in the world should recognize that the world will be governed and will be actually affected by this digital technology fundamentally, including the trade between countries, movement of the people, capital, and so on. So within our law of the customs, we actually recognize that the flow of goods and services is not only in the form of this just the real thing, but also on a digital thing. And that's why we said that it will be very good for the global, including WTO, to recognize that digital movement, whether this is on services. I think Indonesia more and more now enjoying the movie streaming from the company. I don't have to name the name of the company because it will be seen as endorsing. But I mean, that is exactly the fact of life. I mean, song, movie, and even payment system and so on. So this will create quite a fundamental question for a country, any country in the world. Do we have any control? Or if we want to control, what do you want to control? What is the purpose of each economy? What is this landscape change and fundamental change will affect our ability to achieve our goals? Because all countries not in the same level. Some countries still lag behind, fragile, low and lowest least developed, other low income country, other middle income country, other in a more advanced country. But all countries will be affected by this one. And for country which is lag behind, it's going to be even more difficult to catch up when you are not putting the fair level playing field. So that is a little bit long answer, but it is not about revenue. It is about recognizing that the digital technology is become one that need to be put into consideration how you design the right policy and just policy across country.
You've led the climate change agenda in Indonesia, and you've been very passionate about the provision of green finance. In fact, Indonesia, I think, was one of the first to Asia to issue a green bond. Is there momentum? Is there a risk that we'll lose momentum, not only in the new government, but given the various geopolitical risks that everyone is facing at the moment?
Well, as a finance minister, we also try to continue improving and diversifying our instrument. In this case, since 2008-2009, Indonesia continue actually building the diversifying our financing instrument from the conventional into the Sharia base, from the conventional to the sukuk to the green base. And also this is combining these two because we know that the appetite to invest in Indonesia with our reputation getting stronger and better, there is a lot of appetite not only in European, especially London based, but also United States, Asia, Middle East. So green instrument like the green bonds is already issued, and I think now total more than 8 billion or 6 billion that we've issued. And here we actually mostly also issuing in here. So London, regardless what your situation, still actually being seen as a good financial center. Discussion among the finance minister in the last meeting, in spring meeting in Washington DC, saying that issuing green bond is not giving you a green premium, meaning that either you are green or conventional, the investor is just price you and provide you with the same yield. So it's actually market fail on recognizing, while the green bond require a compliance which is much more quite costly, because you really have to show that this is the underlying activity or program is actually consistent with this label of green. So the market is not yet providing this kind of recognition. In terms of volume, I think this is just an instrument, meaning that Indonesia need to look at the need of this transition, and we look at the need which is going to be huge, 285 billion US dollar. In the environment of the higher interest rate for longer, it will be even more expensive. So affordability to finance this transition is going to be a big question mark. We discussed a lot with a lot of multilateral development bank, World Bank, ADB, AIIB, even Islamic Development Bank, how they are going to actually finance, because almost all their president of these MDBs saying that we are going to finance more climate change. So we discuss about whether their structure of financing makes sense. And by the way, Michael, just for your information, the price of many of this MDB is much more expensive than I issue my bonds for the market. So that's also becoming, when they issue, it's going to be something which is, when you talk about the cost of borrowing and cost of capital, this is something which is totally different for Indonesia. So it's a good problem to have, but it is really changing quite a lot. I remember I was finance minister like 10 years ago, and Indonesia, when issue our bond, is still higher than the MDB can offer us. Now it's the other way around. So it is, the price of capital becoming very important, program important, instrument is very important. But we work very, very closely with other stakeholders. Blended finance, Indonesia is already announcing it. We are also, in this case, working very closely with philanthropy as well as the private sector.
Another big issue for the climate agenda is carbon pricing and carbon markets. There are a patchwork of carbon markets around the world at the moment. None of them seem to have be harmonized in any way, shape or form. How big a challenge is that, and how important is that to delivering net zero goals?
Well, I think theoretically it's very important. You talk about climate change, which is not only Indonesia or UK or Fiji Island or United States facing. This is global problem. So you talk about global public goods or global public bad, whatever you call it. So you talk about this global public commodity that is the CO2 emission, regardless where you are going to like emit, but they are creating this choking for this world. So you talk about one commodity which is the same, CO2, which is bad, but you don't have the market, or at least you don't have the integrated market globally. I remember in the G20, my colleague Christia from Canada, the Minister of Finance, saying that the price of carbon in Canada, if you are going to achieve this 1.5% avoiding the increasing temperature of the world, it should be at the level of 175 Canadian dollar. In the United States, I don't know about the price of the carbon over there. Maybe there is no carbon market yet. There is a voluntary. In European, at some point they have 75 down to 25, so it's like very volatile. Singapore, our neighboring country, is starting to have the carbon market. They start with a price of $4. Indonesia start with the $2. So you can imagine, if this is like global trade, the people from here who say that the carbon should be priced at, let's say, $75, and in Indonesia you can buy with $2, why don't we just buy this? And that's why the discussion about the carbon leak and how you are going to make sure that this national determined contribution. I think a lot of work now on this carbon market is going to be one of the most important attention in many of the discussions that we are having. And yes, it will require a lot of thinking, fundamental arrangement and governance. Yeah.
I want to give some time for the audience to ask you questions, if that's okay with you.
Sure. As long
so
as
if you want
not
to ask
difficult question.
Just and the AI couldn't answer the questions we're going to ask, I promise you. I'll come to Noel Kluhane in just a moment to ask the first question, but one more from me. The aspiration to join the OECD, long-term aspiration, I assume it parallels the 2045 vision for Indonesia. Talks have started. Is it realistic? What sense do you get from the OECD? Are they enthusiastic about your joining the group?
Very, very enthusiastic, especially the Secretary General Matthias, not because he's Australian and he wants to have his big neighbor to be in a club, but I think strategically OECD should really, if you are become a club, which is unfortunately the name is like a rich club, which is, I think that's a misnomer. It's more like a like-minded governance based on the market. And I think that is really needed and important for many countries to be able to actually then integrate with this global economy. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, geopolitics situation today is becoming fragmented. But the like-minded country which agree that the market mechanism and open market competitive is important for your economy, I think that's important. And that's why for the OECD to know and see Indonesia would like to join, and that's will strengthening many of this fundamental reform that I've already explained to you all. It's not something, this is voluntarily, and there is a mutual feeling of for OECD is going to be good and for Indonesia is also good. And then after Indonesia announcing our accession process with the OECD, now the Thailand is also starting to apply. So it's good to have
it's starting a movement.
Yeah.
Right. Let's go to Noel Kluhane a bit. Noel, and then Mtesh will come to you up there. Okay.
Thank you, Minister, for your remarks. Noel Kluhane from BDO and various ASEAN business councils. I have a particular question for you about some of President Jokowi's signature policies, which were the banning of the export of particular products, including palm oil at one stage, but more enduringly nickel, of which you have the largest reserves in the world. That seemed like a success in terms of the downstreaming effect, creating refining and manufacturing batteries in Indonesia, but maybe not a long-term strategy because batteries are increasingly made with lithium instead of nickel. So I'd love to get your thoughts on whether Indonesia will persist with that policy. Thank you.
Well, Indonesia is comply with many of this, and we are hoping that the market mechanism will solve our problem, which is not it's actually not happening. So sometimes you really need a little bit, what you call it, industrial policy, which is now becoming a fashion to many countries, talking about the industrial policy. I mean, the approach of the Indonesia is a combination between improving our business climate, and that's why we have this omnibus law on ease of doing business in Indonesia. We call it job creation, in which we simplify many of our regulatory policy in labor, environment, investment, as well as small, medium enterprises. All those things has been overhauled. What is the objective? Is actually for the investor come to Indonesia and feel that, oh, okay, this is a good place to do and make sense, and I understand the regulation, so I will invest in here. On the other hand, investors sometimes need to be convinced about, okay, we export quite a lot of, including the strategic mineral. And this is not just yesterday. It's been like 60 decades or even 70 decades since Indonesia independent. Sometime in my conversation with some of the big company, and I said, you promised to build the smelter in Indonesia. That promise back in 1990 and never delivered that. Why is that? Oh, because smelter is so expensive, Sri Mulyani. You need to know what you want. And why? Well, because this is so risky and need a lot of capital. But then why you open smelter in my neighboring country, although they don't have those raw material? What is the difference between Indonesia and our neighboring country? They cannot answer. So that means decision by business sometimes need to be nudge. You have this nudge, right? The book which is very popular. So this is the way that the Indonesia tried to nudge this decision in order for us to be able to convince. But it is not just forcing that you have to invest in Indonesia and then you exploit them, but we provide you with the best investment climate and now you have to invest in Indonesia. So it is like a win-win. And don't forget, as I mentioned earlier, with those kind of value added which is now happening in almost all, not only the strategic mineral, but almost all mineral in Indonesia, it contributes to the stability of Indonesia economy. Indonesia economy is stable and continue growing high, it will provide benefit for the region and the world. So I think that is the good game. In a way that this is what we are doing now, that we recognize that a lot of value added of many of this industry in Indonesia should and could be done. Within the context of the electric vehicle, battery technology and so on, I think this is continue moving and Indonesia watching very carefully as well as discussing with many parties in order for us to be able to position in the right policy and place for this kind of continued dynamic changing.
Natasha Chu now from HSBC, and after Natasha, Dasuki will come to you.
Thank you, Minister. Having myself lived in Indonesia during the 97-98 financial crisis, I appreciate that Indonesia's economic stability is hard won, and it's amazing to see that Indonesia is now on course to be the world's 4th largest economy within, I think it's 20 years. What are some of the main factors, do you think, that may impede that goal? And indeed, do you think it can be met sooner?
Well, I think the crisis is very changing Indonesia really a lot and fundamentally. It is not only in the form of the cost of this banking crisis, which may be among the most expensive bailout in the world. I think we are only compared with Argentina maybe, because it's almost 80% of our GDP in bailing out this banking system. But it was really a very deep fundamental crisis for the Indonesia. The crisis for the government, the trust is lacking or gone. The crisis in terms of the way we govern politically in Indonesia, and that's why we become, although Indonesia is actually a democratic system, we always have 5 years election. But then we said that it should be a real democracy, which is not going to be know who's going to win any election. In the past, we always know who's going to be the president even before the election. So I think that's, and then we have huge fundamentally change in terms of our legislation. As I mentioned earlier, even in the economic front, and that's credit to President Habibie at that time, that he's actually passing more than 200 or 300 legislation, as I mentioned earlier, bankruptcy law, competition law, Bank Indonesia independence, state finance laws, treasury law, banking law. There are so many laws which is actually being passed, and that's become a fundamental for Indonesia. But passing law is actually one thing. We have the Anti-Corruption Commission established during that, and that's become also a momentum for us. For me, immediately as a finance minister 2005, that is really an opening and momentum to build the governance, cleaning up from the corruption, building the capacity of our staff, creating transparency. I don't know about the UK, but is there any in this UK that the Minister of Finance every month going to the public, explaining about how much I collect, how much I spend, how much debt I issue every month, not only once a year when you go to the parliament. This is just to show the transparency, accountability become one of the foundation for this democratic, which is also healthy for Indonesia. So yeah, I think the most ingredient is that crisis provide us with a totally change in terms of the way we govern the economy, and also politically synchronized on a more opening democratic system.
Dasuki Shitani now from Mitsui.
Thank you, Minister. I'm from Mitsui. I have one question regarding to the capital relocation. What is the most challenging tasks from the point of view of fiscal policy of Indonesia? Thank you.
The capital what?
Capital relocation to the Kalimantan.
To Kalimantan. Oh, the capital relocation. The new capital city has been built, and Why Kalimantan? Well, in the past, the first president said that Indonesia should have the capital in Kalimantan. That's one thing. The second one, from the geographic point of view, it is really in the middle of Indonesia. The third one, as a finance minister, I think I have quite a unique answer for that. I've been actually quite struggle in how we are going to create a new source of growth for especially many islands in Indonesia. If you look at the composition of the revenue and economy, even if the mining is in Papua or in Kalimantan or in Sulawesi, the headquarters of all those corporations is always in Jakarta. So the revenue is really looks like Jakarta-based, but actually the activity is on the outer island. And then you cannot really, as much as you try to design the transfer of the government finance to the local government, it will not create this kind of the new source of growth. So I think in a way, not only symbolically, but also in terms of the economic activity, this new capital city in Kalimantan will provide the Kalimantan to grow at the level what they deserve. To be very honest, Kalimantan is always growing very low, while their natural resources has been actually being moved to Java Island, which is more heavily populated. So this is going to be a good, and if I can add you with more perspective, Sumatra, which is like the biggest island on the western side, close to Singapore and Malaysia, we built the toll road north to south. And actually, the amount of capital or spending to build this toll road is much expensive than this new capital. But everybody looking at this new capital. But this toll road is going to change Sumatra quite a lot because they are the one who also naturally resource rich. They quite diversify. Proximity to the Singapore, Malaysia is very logical to have a much more bigger and vibrant economy. So in a way, Indonesia need to have source of growth which is beyond Jakarta or Java, and that's good. Not only just a rhetoric politically, but also moving and investing in a significant way.
Tara Delaney now from Havion.
It's a related question to trade, but on the import restrictions side of things, just would be interested in understanding what you see the outlook with regard to the current quota systems, whether there may be opportunity to negotiate them not just on an annual basis, but on a 3 and 5 year basis, to give more, I suppose, stability to businesses. And then just on the other side of that, just with regard to then investment and how restricting raw material imports might actually impact the outside exporting side of things, just where you feel that might be going?
Well, ideally, if you talk as an economist talking about the global trade and so on, trade is supposed to be a win-win in this case, whether you're talking about export and import. But we also can see that many countries becoming industrial not because of the pure market mechanism. There is always a government support, or in this case policy, that is allowing that first forces. I think the combination is more like how you are going to combine the discipline of the market forces that will allow you to then operate in a more efficient, good governed way, vis-a-vis, as I said earlier, a nudge that needs to actually create more value added. So it is, I think, that kind of experience which also inspire us and see, for example, if you look from Japan, even South Korea, or even China, you can see this is not pure just market mechanism to become an industrial. You always have a certain policy. So yes, from the point of view that it will affect the supply chains in the other destination, but for a big country like Indonesia to be able to have a more value added, becoming more industrial, becoming middle, higher, or even higher income country, I think this is going to be a good for the global economy. Now Indonesia has become a destination of many, and having a middle class Indonesia, we are traveling a lot. We are going to UK, we are going to Europe, and so I think this is just a strategy which we know that it will be totally orthodox and conventional, but sometimes you have to do it, but not in a excessive, so that you are going to totally abandon the market discipline. So a combination between two is still needed. There is a certain discretion, but also market discipline.
I'm afraid we are out of time. We could easily go on another couple of hours, and I'd very much like to, but I know you have a very busy schedule. Sri Mulyani, can't thank you enough for being here. You've clearly laid the foundations for a very bright future in Indonesia. I mean, the change in Indonesia over the 10 years you've been finance minister has been truly breathtaking, so many congratulations for that. Good luck with the next 6 or 8 months, because it's a very turbulent time, and I'm sure you'll put in place the budget that will enable the new government to have a flying start. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking you.